Can I ask you this? Was there up to 7 hominid type species on the planet at one time? Is that all been proven scientifically now? Like, is that a thing?
Creationism and evolution are converging, and I think we see it with physics. I think we are in changing times where there was once division, we're going to see that coming together. And I think what we once knew, as we get more evidence and we discover more, those two separate paradigms will come together.
Welcome to the Find Your Influence podcast with Anton Guinea, where we unpack all things influence and we help leaders particularly find their influence by talking to amazing humans and finding out what influence means to them, who they've been influenced by and who they have influenced. And this podcast episode, proudly sponsored by the Guinea Group of Companies. The Guinea Group helps leaders upgrade, upskill, uplift their teams and their influence.
Here we are, team. Thank you for tuning in or watching wherever you get your podcasts to our amazing podcast, Find Your Influence. So good to have you. And it's also amazing to have two groundbreaking, life-changing women today. I've got Elizabeth Lang, who is one of the founding CEOs of Diversity Focus, actually, a social enterprise specialising in research, consulting, training and e-learning for inclusive workplace cultures. And that sounds interesting. Co-founder of the Racism Register. Her work spans grassroots community development, tertiary teaching and social sciences, qualitative research. Interesting. A researcher and public speaking, including international platforms at the UN in Geneva. Now I'm keen to hear about that. And as well, Elizabeth too, or the other Elizabeth, Elizabeth Tekanyo. Yes, Tekanyo is the founder of Racism Register alongside Elizabeth Lang, an anti-racism advocate, educator and researcher with expertise in anthropology, gender-based violence prevention, social justice and public health. Originally from San Francisco or the Bay Area, having lived, studied and worked in Botswana, Germany, Costa Rica, Colorado, and now Western Australia. Gee, you two have got an impressive resume. Resume's there. So maybe, Elizabeth Lang, while you've got the microphone, where did this all start for you? Maybe let's talk Racism Register and let's understand what that meant for you and where it came from, and just for our viewers' perspective, what it is for a start, please.
So what it is an online platform that allows people to essentially document their experiences of racism, whether that is an experience that people have personally gone through themselves or whether that is something that they were a witness to, so such as something that happened to a colleague or even just while at the shops. And they might be thinking, well, this is not okay, but I also don't want to hold this information. Where does this go? So it's essentially a reporting platform that allows us to be able to document incidences of racism Australia-wide.
Wow. Now, can I ask, and maybe Elizabeth Tekanyo, Elizabeth T., what drove this? Was there a personal experience for you? Like, did you feel racially vilified, or what was the drive? Where's the why?
Well, I'm a self and non-self-identified white person. So in terms of myself experiencing racism and the power dynamics behind it, I come from a place of allyship. So originally from the Bay Area, I did my undergrad in anthropology and archaeology and met my husband, who was my next door neighbor in the small country of Botswana in Southern Africa. He is a Black African man. And when I told him that I was very excited to come over because I had an opportunity to study in Western Australia, both of our first questions were, okay, what do we need to prepare for? And unfortunately, Australia does have sometimes a more global reputation of having, that there is systemic racism. And what did we need to be aware of as migrants, and as myself being his wife and supporting him? So we now have a child, a mixed race child, and Liz and I we met each other 5 years ago, but we've been working in anti-racism spaces for the last 10. And it was just getting responses from participants around what is racism? Does racism exist in Australia, and how can we measure it, or how do we know that it truly exists? And Liz and I are both PhD researchers, and we came to a place where we said, hey, our kids are experiencing racism in school. Liz and her husband and my husband are experiencing racism all the time. We need to do something about it that's beyond a tick box corporate educational session, but rather let's actually collect data on this, and let's make it everyone's responsibility. So it's not only those people of color who experience racism, but also those white mainstream Australians who witness it.
Right, thank you so much. And Elizabeth Lang, in saying that, so what Elizabeth T just said then was, which it's sad for me, that has Australia got a reputation internationally as being really racist, have we?
At least in the US, but I know the US has worse reputations in other ways, but in terms of racism, yes, it is. Yeah.
We've got a bad reputation. Isn't that sad? Like, every Australian should be listening to that and going, really? Do we really want to be known internationally like that, or with that as a frame of reference? Like, would that prevent people from wanting to come here?
I think it could prevent people from coming, but I think what it does is it kind of creates a dynamic where even when people come, people may come expecting it, and to some degree almost accepting that that's just a part of living in Australia, which I think is incredibly sad. But I think part of the problem is because Australia's got there's a big banter culture in Australia. You know, people are very casual here. Oh yeah. So white mainstream Australian culture, I'll say that is, you know, very obviously laid back. There's a big banter culture, you know, jokes, etc. That's a normal part of kind of everyday white Australia, right? And I think part of the challenge when we talk about racism is that within an Australian context, it's casualized. And so therefore, people don't see themselves as racist because they say things that are racist, but say, oh, it's just a joke. And I think that that's part of the challenge, that people don't understand that racism is not actually, yes, you could be a part of the Ku Klux Klan or a part of white supremacist group, and that is racist, but there are many manifestations of racism, including everyday casualized elements of racism that can be very much embedded in the culture, and then therefore people don't see it as racist.
Wow. And people obviously give themselves permission then to sort of make comments that probably will be, let's say, below the line commentary. Wow. Thank you so much. Now, can I ask you, just from a personal perspective, and we'll get into how you're influencing the planet to change this, hopefully, over time. I'm so intrigued by your research too. I'm so intrigued by anthropology and all the other stuff you do. But is there if you hear that, like the negative or derogatory comments about a particular race of people or a colour of people, is that, you know, that must be quite like a painful thing to hear, yeah? And it's just, I suppose, like, how do you, just for everyone's benefit out there, how does it make you feel? And I'd like people to hear this, because I wonder if maybe we on this podcast educate a few people about the impact of their banter or their casual conversations or their jokes.
Yeah, I think for me personally, coming from my home country and not having experienced it myself as a white woman, but being married to a Black man and coming into the culture here, it was the first weekend that the first week we had arrived, and we were in a Salvation Army, and an older white gentleman walked through the door. We were just trying to get basic living necessities while we were setting up, and he grabbed artificial flowers, ran up to my husband and pointed them at him and said, what did he say? He said, I'm going to shove these flowers up your ass if you don't go back to your country. And it was shocking for me as a white woman to see that overt racism, but then just having been with him for 15 plus years, just empathizing and seeing the systemic and global impacts of racism on him, on his community, on his ability to seek employment here, on his ability to study, to, access basic services. It was really eye-opening to the extent where I was tired of sitting around passively watching, and I wanted to, I was very lucky to meet Liz, to be able to actually have this opportunity to stand up and support the voices and contribute as well towards the change.
Good on you. Thank you. Is it okay if I call you Liz and Elizabeth? Would that be all right? Because I like.
Maybe just clarify which one's which.
Yeah, you're Liz.
Who's Liz?
Because you're Liz. Yeah, because Elizabeth keeps calling you Liz. So,
Or Elizabeth? I'm Liz. Oh, Liz.
yeah. So that's really intriguing. That, as a naive business owner who's pretty sheltered in central Queensland, and who's lived through probably the 80s and the 90s when it probably was racist, and now I wouldn't think you'd see comments like that in Australia, but obviously you do, and we've got a fair way to go then, by the sounds of that, if that's still happening. Where to from here for you two? Maybe Liz first. Liz, now, Elizabeth's got a deep experience with that. You're obviously a woman who's come to Australia from somewhere else. Where to from here? What is it that how are you trying to influence us as Australians because you're here, or you're influencing the planet because we're finding your influence here? What are you doing to influence this systemic problem that we got?
I guess, through the racism register, data collection is very crucial. So data collection is crucial because without data, it's essentially invisible, right? So when we're able to accurately measure something, then it allows us to have dialogue. It allows us to be able to find solutions and ways to address the problem. But to be able to do that, you have to actually name the problem. And I think part of the challenge in Australia is that people don't want to talk about racism because it's seen as this extreme kind of thing that nobody wants to identify with. And so for me, ideally, what we're working towards as, I guess, our big picture stuff is to get society to a point where there's a level of understanding about what racism actually means, that it can manifest at various levels, including obviously, the example that Liz shared about, her husband being racially vilified, but also other than those overt experiences, there are also very covert ways that racism can manifest, such as this casual joke at a barbecue that somebody says and everybody nervously laughs, even though it's very uncomfortable. To be able to go, here are some tools to actually have the conversation. Maybe you're not going to call the person out in front of everybody, but maybe there's an opportunity to call a family member aside and say, look, what you said the other day made me very uncomfortable. And to use, I guess, our spheres of influence to be able to create a positive change in society. That's ultimately what we're working towards. And so for me, I want us to get to a point where there is that recognition of what racism actually means, how it can manifest. And ultimately for me as a mother, so that my children are not facing the kinds of challenges or the kinds of silly questions that I get on a daily basis because I look like this, right? But sadly, it's also something that's a part of their experience. Oh gosh, how long do we have? I mean, questions like, I think firstly, the question of where do you come from? And I'll just start there because it's a tiring question, because if you imagine being asked that by 20 people that you meet in a day, that's extremely exhausting. Now, for me, I don't mind because I live in Australia, but I don't consider myself Australian. I am an Australian citizen. But for my children who are born here, for example, the only place they've ever known is Australia. And so for them to be assumed that they don't belong because they have dark skin versus a kid who gets off the plane from England last week, who's assumed to be Australian. I think that's the challenge, is that as a society, we need to understand identity better. We need to understand that when we talk about Australian, it doesn't mean a white person. And if you're asking someone, where do you come from, such as my 12-year-old son, then kind of wrapped around that question is the idea that he does not belong. And I think that is very harmful, because that leads to the kinds of experiences that he's had in high school and also in primary school, of kids saying, horrible things to him and feeling like it's okay because it's very casual.
Wow. Thank you, Liz. Elizabeth, I'm guessing your husband gets the same question on a daily basis. Where are you from? And your husband probably has to go through on the same journey. How do we? What's the solution? Is it okay? So it's a mindset change. I want to just take you back to something you said, understanding what is racism. For everyone out there, this is intriguing for me. So I would have just thought it was really negative talk, maybe abuse even of a different race of people. So what is racism? Can you define racism for us, pretty please?
Racism is essentially the overt or covert vilification or violence, abuse, microaggressions that are put onto another race. And we think of it in terms of not only between races, but also the power that each race holds within a society. So it's intersectional, and we follow that paradigm.
Right. Now, I get the overt one. The covert, you said your hubby faces challenges covertly. So does that mean your hubby doesn't get the opportunities that, say, a privileged white male would? Is that what I'm hearing? Jeez. And is that?
Yeah, it's the yeah.
Is that deliberate, do you think?
Oh,
Like, is it
it's
some?
No, it's subconscious, and it's in many instances, 90% of the time, it is not conscious. So it's unconscious bias, and it stems from a sense of ignorance around who is in my. We do an activity in training called sphere of influence, which is quite interesting in terms of that term influence for this podcast. But we actually ask participants, when you look at the people closest to you in your life, your family, your kids, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, and then your society as a whole, we actually have you list out those demographic variables. So how many, in terms of gender, women, men, other genders, how old are they? What's their class or their socioeconomic status? And what is their ethnicity? How many languages do they speak? And where do they sit in terms of their racial identity? So when you start picking apart around who's influencing you and why you should care about people who have a different skin color to you, we really bring that back to, you need to put yourself in situations where you're able to empathize with someone else, and you need to be in a place where you can actually ask questions and connect with people that don't necessarily look like you and are from your hometown.
And then you go and be interested in them and ask questions, and then find out that they're a human, not something else. Another. They're not Irish.
And then you date them and you have kids together.
Woot, woot. Go you. I love it. This is an intriguing conversation, and this would be a tough conversation for some of my generation. So Generation X males brought up in Australia, I'm realising as we speak, because I have these conversations all the time, and I seek them out for these podcasts and for other reasons, because I feel like we have to share this information. We've got to learn from each other. But the more you talk, it's really clear that some of this is going to be unconscious, and we need to be consciously aware of our biases and be willing, and I love that word, empathise, and maybe change some of our behaviour and actually look around and go and meet other humans and maybe be interested, not interesting.
Yeah, I think another thing, we've had the March for Australia rallies recently come up, and we talk about mass immigration and kind of this idea that we need to fight for resources, or that it's the government's role to allocate more resources to equate to the incoming populations. Racism has come up in these rallies, whether that was the intent or not. Neo-Nazis came forward, white supremacists, and we've been really curious and interested in terms of, like, what does it mean to be a white Australian, and what does home mean for a white Australian? We talk about Australia Day versus Invasion Day. We talk about the injustices experienced by white Australian ancestors, and even to current day towards Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And I think it brings us back to what is home, and how can we create home, particularly for white Australian migrants whose ancestors didn't come here by choice, and they don't have that connection to history, to their ancestors, to where they're from. I know 23andMe and those other tests are particularly popular among white people because there is that displacement. But now that white Australians are living on Aboriginal land, we have to find a way to respect the land that we're on and connect with people that look different from us. So redefine home as migrants and settlers and what.
So I like that. Yeah, what is home? I like
beyond the barbecue and footy. We need to go beyond the barbecue and footy.
Beyond the barbecue and footy, I like that.
Figure out where we come from and who we are. Yeah.
And I've often, like, everyone's doing this at the moment, the whole thing, and they're, no, I'm Scottish. I thought I was Irish. No, I'm English. I thought I was Scottish, and I'm Wales. I'm like, oh, and that's all intriguing stuff for people. But I think that that's about 100 years ago or 200 years ago. What about now? Who are you now, and who are we now? I guess as a culture and as a civilization and as a country, and how do we want to identify? I suppose. And, I think there's some more current questions that we probably should be asking.
I'm very lucky in the U.S. My dad's now passed away, but he was Swedish American, so I grew up having initially very limited information about my cultural heritage and background. And my dad was very interested in his ancestry, looked up who his grandparents were, and went back in the family tree, and actually went to Sweden to find his relatives. And now we're quite close, and we've established family. We've learned about cultural customs. We've done exchanges, so we are lucky enough to live both in Sweden and the U.S. and visit for periods of time. And I think, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think
it was great to
connect with where you're from. If you can connect with where you're from, then you're not going to be so defensive about the land you live on, and exclusionary to others around you.
Right, I've never made that connection. If you knew a bit more about your history, you might be more comfortable with your present. Thanks. Liz, have you ever done anything like that? Like, have you done the family tree, or do you know, Elizabeth Lang, where you come from and where your history is and your heritage and all that sort of stuff? Or
I'm pretty solid in terms of my identity. I did migrate to Australia. I wasn't born here, but I came as a child. And so, yeah, I'm very much still linked to my ancestral lands. I do come from South Sudan, but it was one country with Sudan. Sudan's in the news at the moment because of the conflict and the violence going on. But that's where I was actually born. And we left when I was very young because of the unsafe situation. My father decided to relocate us to Egypt, actually. So I spent a portion of my childhood in Egypt before we moved to Australia.
Wow. What was that like? Was that different to Australia? Very different culture, or?
Very different. Very different. Yeah.
Silly question.
Where are you
I know,
from,
sorry.
Anha?
Oh, thanks for asking. I'm from a place about 2 hours that way called Gladstone, Queensland, Elizabeth. So I was born and bred. I was raised in regional Queensland for the first 21 years of life, and then I was raised by a teacher and an industrial worker, and then moved away for 10 years, went over to WA for 4 years, was working up in the Pilbara in the mines, which was interesting. And then we came back to Brisbane, we work at Santos, and then I went down to Wollongong, and I was climbing the ladder of corporate success till I got made redundant, and my lovely wife said we're going back to Gladstone to raise our kids at home. She was the daughter of a police officer. They moved around. She went to 8 schools, so she said that we're not having that for our kids. I said, okay. So we moved back to Gladstone. We've been there ever since. So 21 years grown up there, 10 years away, and then 20 years back sort of thing. So I'm just over 50 now. So Queenslander, outback Queenslander.
And where are your ancestors from? And who are your ancestors?
That is such a great question, Elizabeth. I would have, seriously, this is what I would say from Gladstone. I've never looked into Brisbane, Australia. I don't know. I've never really asked that question. That is thank you for asking. It's an intriguing question that I'd love to know, but I've just never. My dad says we're Irish. Okay, cool. Love the Irish, but I don't know. Would you advise finding out? Does it give you some sort of, like you say, yeah. Thank you. There's a tip. There's a good tip. Great question. Do most people know, or am I the exception, or am I the rule?
Do most people know? Oh, in terms of their ancestry?
Yeah.
Liz, you can give your perspective, but I find, having grown up in Australia, most white Australians kind of talk about just being Australian, or, often people revert to, I grew up in Geraldton and I spent X amount of years and then we moved to Perth, for example. So I from my experience, most people haven't really tracked their ancestry, I'd say. Would that be correct from your perspective, Liz, having lived here, 8 years now?
Yeah. But I think there's value in figuring out where you're from and what culture do you hold. Yes, we all are enjoying the current culture of what it means to be in Australia, to be Australian today, but by understanding where we come from, we can also embrace the fact that unless we're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, we're all coming here to enjoy and reap the benefits of living in such a beautiful place. And how can we share our culture and our experiences from our lineages with each other in a respectful way? And I think it just gives perspective in terms of other people coming and other migrants of color, for example. And what does that mean? Who are more newly arrived. I'll put it like that.
The penny just dropped for me. Now I get it. That when none of us were really from here originally. I get that now. Thank you so much. That is such a... I've never thought of that perspective before. We sort of identify as convicts, really. Like we've got this proud you know, we were rat bags. We're the rat bags that they didn't want in England, and we stole the loaf of bread, and so they put us on a ship and sent us out here to build some houses and sort of, you know, make the place great. But we've all come from somewhere else. We all have lineage somewhere else, not here. That is an intriguing way to think about that. Thank you, Elizabeth. So tell me this, team. Tell me this. How are you going to, with all this information on the racism register, which I love data. I've done a research assignment with CQU into leadership, so I get research. What are you going to do with that data? How are you going to influence? Are you going to influence government? Are you going to influence schools? Are you going to influence organisations? Like, where's the data usage going to be?
Well, firstly, we are going to use, so we're going to publish yearly reports of the data that we're getting, obviously de-identify the information. So we will be using it. It'll be publicly made available for individuals to just consume. In terms of making it publicly available, researchers can use it, organizations can use it, businesses can use it. So the data can be used as a tool for raising consciousness across Australia. And then in terms of schools, for us, I guess, because of our children, which we touched on, we're very passionate about creating a generational shift so that 10, 20 years from now, things are very different to what they are. And we see data as very crucial to being able to achieve that consciousness raising across Australia. Liz, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, going back to our definition of racism, and as racism is a form of violence against a particular race, we're here to support people as well. So, there will be hate crimes reported to us. And so we're hoping to develop as we go in terms of referral pathways to state and federal police to make it easier for people to report. If you've experienced violence based on the color of your skin, to also offer other services like legal, pro bono legal services. Kudos to the Racial Justice Center. If counseling, or, if you've experienced violence based on your gender or your religion, we can refer you to other registers as well that collect data on that. So there's a systemic purpose as well as an individual support aspect to it, but ultimately it's to kind of unearth and not only show through data what racism is and how it's experienced, but also to drive that we have a problem so that then we can really focus on the education, the racial literacy, and how we build that and teach everyone to be better humans.
Teach everyone to be better humans. Use the data to change mindset, and therefore obviously that will change our behaviour over time, and we will become less violent, less racially vilifying, whatever the right word there is. That's really cool. So you're going to influence people with information. I love it. And a generational shift. So what does an ideal Australia look like for you? So for our viewers and listeners out there, this is going to be really important, the way Liz or Elizabeth answer this question. What is an amazing, good human Australia look like for you? What disappears? What changes?
For me personally, an ideal Australia looks like a place where somebody could feel like they could be themselves at any given moment, and they don't have to code switch or change how they speak or how they dress or how they behave in order to be more palatable to people. For me, that's what an ideal Australia looks like, where people could be themselves at their most core level, and also feel like in being themselves, there's no, people don't have there's no assumptions that are made about them before someone's even gotten to know them. They don't get weird questions like I get at networking events.
I gotcha. Okay. Thank you. So You know, and what it sort of reminds me of Liz and Elizabeth is, you know, in organisations we talk about psychological safety, where we all feel safe to contribute, to share, to be ourselves, to bring our full selves to work. It feels like we need psychological safety as a culture, as a nation, as an Australian. You know, everyone feels safe just to be themselves. That is a good answer. I like that.
I think for me, it's, you know, the first thing I did when I arrived off the plane was I looked for a bush tucker, you know, an Aboriginal restaurant, you know, and I was expecting representation and leadership much more so to be that of our, you know, First Nations people, because this is ultimately their land and their country, and surprised to not see that representation. So I think when we can give space to acknowledge and humble ourselves to the fact that we are all, depending on if we're not Aboriginal, we've migrated to Australia at some point, whether by choice or through displacement. However, we're all here, and how can we learn from, you know, this ancient, you know, from Aboriginal people and their culture that spans, you know, through ancient times. So there would be arguments. I know the San in Southern Africa also have quite a long lineage. So we could, you know, I'm sure at First Nations conferences that happen around the world, there is that debate around who holds that longest lineage. But yes.
Hey, while you got the microphone, Elizabeth, can I ask you something at the risk of offending some viewers? Because I was very much raised creation, but I've got a science degree, so I really need to sort of lean into evolution. Can I ask you this? What from an anthropology perspective, was there up to 7 hominid type species on the planet at one time? Is that all been proven scientifically now? Like, is that a thing?
I think creationism and evolution are converging, and I think we see it with physics. I think we are in changing times where there was once division, we're going to see that coming together. And I think what we once knew, as we get more evidence and we discover more, those two separate paradigms will come together.
You heard it first here. Liz and Elizabeth have said we're going to change the world with paradigm shifting around evolution versus creation, or creation versus evolution, whatever side you sit on. When I asked my lovely wife, Mrs. G, the keeper of all knowledge, I said, Mrs. G, how do I reconcile this with myself? She said, baby, she was a teacher in a Catholic school. She said, baby, it's very easy. She said, we were created and then we evolved. And I said, babe, that'll do me. I said, I'm cool with that. Thank you. But I think you're right. We do have a fair bit of a way to go to bridge that divide. And there's people that adamant either way. Cool. And I just love hearing the discussion. Ladies, you have been amazing to talk to. Thank you so much. I hope you've had the chance to sort of express some of the ideas that you've got, to maybe tell Australians what challenges you've had from a racism perspective. I've learned a lot, which is why I do these podcasts. Very quickly, from a leadership perspective, so you're both parents, you're both organisational leader. What does leadership mean to you? Just out of interest, because we do leadership coaching, that's our jam. We work with leaders everywhere. What's leadership? What's your leadership mantra? Please.
Leadership for me means helping to create the kinds of environments where people feel safe. That's essentially what it comes down to for me, is that component of safety. And you spoke about psychological safety earlier. For me, leaders are crucial because they set the tone for the workplace culture. And so if you want to create a positive shift, you really have to look at yourself as a leader in terms of what are you putting out there? How are people learning by you? Not through what you say, not through word, but through deed. That's what leadership is.
For me, it's the humble leader. So lead through humility and you know, as you learn, you think you're learning more as you rise the ranks, you're actually recognizing more and more the ignorance and the less you know, if that makes sense. So similar to as you progress through academia, as you progress towards you know, bigger and bigger scopes of leadership, to really always come back to humility and always continue to remember that you're a learner and that you're being led by those that are following your word or that sort of thing. So yeah.
Great answer. Stay humble, stay hungry, and stay smart, as Patrick Lencioni said in that great TED Talk. Ladies, you've been amazing. The last question that I ask all of our podcast guests is, could you please, after this, and you can think of it now or you can tell me later on, or you can, if you're happy to. Did you read the question set? Yeah, I know you're both researchers, so you would have read the question set, I'm sure, done the research. Did you think of a great human who would be cool to talk to next, who's got like a big picture idea about they're trying to influence the planet?
I have so many people in mind. I'm gonna say one person. The first one that comes to mind is a woman by the name of Sisonke Msimang. She's amazing.
I'm not even going to try and write that down. I'm going to wait for the email address. Thank you. I know my limitations. And that's okay. Is it okay if I make contact after this, and maybe if you wouldn't mind introducing me? I get to have some more great conversations then, and we get to share some information with the world. Is that okay?
Yes.
Elizabeth Lang, amazing. I just, team we've spoken to amazingly educated, not only, and I always say that you might get a PhD, but you can also get a PhD in life, and these two ladies have got that because they've done some hard yards and been, I guess, felt unsafe in their own country really at different times. And we've had Elizabeth Lang and we've had Elizabeth Tekanyo. Both of these ladies are amazing. They're the founders of the Racism Register. If you or anyone that you know experiences racism, please, girls, ladies, where can we find is it www.racismregister.com? Is that the story?
.org, yes. www.racismregister.org.
You rock. Liz and Elizabeth, thank you so very much for opening up your hearts and sharing today with us and with our listeners just how probably closed-minded some of us can be, and how we could open our mind up to the experiences and the lives that others live.
Thank you. Can I say one more thing just last?
No way. I'm closing this out. No, good.
I know the topic of racism is extremely sensitive in Australia. And I just want to say it's important that listeners understand it's not about shaming people. I think if more people look at themselves critically and look at how, even unintentionally, they may be perpetuating racism, then we can create a positive shift within society. Because it's not about this extreme forms of violence. It's about the everyday stuff that we also do, the way that we include or exclude some people. And I think that we all have a role to play in creating a more equitable and safe society as individuals, as leaders, as colleagues, etc. That's a role for all of us to play. And more of us need to look at ourselves more critically, evaluate our behaviors, and be open to feedback. If we receive feedback that, we could do better in some aspects, rather than getting offended, go, oh, I've got some work to do. And we've all got work to do, including people of color.
Beautiful. And say thanks for the feedback. I'll work on it. Thank you, ladies. You're amazing. You have been so cool to talk to.
Thank you for listening or viewing our Find Your Influence podcast with Anton Guinea. Another great chat. Please be one of the 10% of people who follow and subscribe and like our videos so that you can get more of them and you can hear more of our amazing conversations, the conversations that I get to have and that I get to share.